She was not the kind of student people noticed right away. When she first walked into the small music school, she kept her head low and her hands close to her body, as if she did not want to take up space. The hallway smelled of old wood and paper sheets, and the sound of piano notes floated from different rooms. Some were sharp and confident, others shaky and unsure. She paused for a moment, listening, before quietly stepping inside. Her family had signed her up for lessons with no big expectations. They simply wanted her to try something new, something meaningful. At home, there was an old upright piano placed near a window. It had a few chipped keys and made a soft clicking sound when pressed too hard. She used to sit there after school, playing slowly, repeating the same notes again and again. No one forced her. No one praised her much either. She just played because it made the world feel calmer. On her first day of class, the teacher asked her to play something simple. Her fingers hesitated. She made a small mistake and stopped, then started again. It was not impressive. It was not terrible. Just ordinary. The teacher nodded politely and wrote something on a clipboard. Another student played right after her, faster and louder, earning a smile and a quick compliment. She returned to her seat without saying a word. Weeks passed, and nothing about her seemed special on the surface. She arrived on time, sat quietly, and followed instructions carefully. She did not raise her hand or ask questions. When others talked about competitions or performances, she stayed silent. Some teachers barely remembered her name, and others mixed her up with different students. She blended into the background of the classroom like a soft shadow. During group practice sessions, she played gently, never overpowering the room. If she made a mistake, she corrected it without frustration. There was no drama in her movements, no visible hunger for attention. To most people, she looked like someone who enjoyed music but lacked ambition. A few teachers quietly assumed she would quit after a year or two, like many others. At home, things were different, though no one else could see it. She practiced late into the evening, long after homework was done. She played pieces far slower than written, breaking them into tiny parts. Sometimes she played a single line for nearly an hour, repeating it until it felt natural. She did not rush. She listened carefully to every sound, adjusting her touch until the tone felt right. When she made progress, she did not celebrate. She simply moved on. She did not watch videos of famous pianists or talk about dreams of large stages. Instead, she listened to recordings with her eyes closed, imagining how the music moved. She paid attention to silence as much as sound. To her, music was not about showing skill. It was about understanding feeling. At school, evaluations were coming up. Teachers needed to decide which students would move forward and which would stay behind. During one session, her performance was steady but plain. She followed the notes exactly as written, without dramatic flair. When she finished, the room stayed quiet. One teacher cleared their throat and said she needed to be more expressive. Another wrote a short note and moved on. After the class, two teachers spoke briefly near the door. They were not unkind, just practical. One said she seemed disciplined but limited. The other agreed, saying she lacked spark. They wondered if she was better suited for basic instruction rather than advanced training. Neither of them asked her how she practiced or what music meant to her. The next week, a challenge was planned for several students. The idea was to test confidence and skill under pressure. One teacher chose a piece known for its difficulty. It was fast, complex, and emotionally demanding. Most students at that level struggled with it. The teacher looked at her name on the list and hesitated for a moment. Then, almost casually, decided to assign it to her as well. The decision was not meant to be cruel. It was meant to confirm an assumption. The teacher believed she would try, fail, and accept her place. It would make the upcoming evaluations easier. No one announced this intention. The challenge was presented as an opportunity. When she received the sheet music, she did not react. She glanced at it briefly, then placed it carefully into her folder. Others around her whispered and exchanged looks. One student raised their eyebrows, surprised she had been given something so difficult. She simply nodded and returned to her seat. At home that night, She opened the sheet music on the old piano. She did not play it right away. She read through it slowly, tracing the notes with her eyes. She imagined how it would sound, where the tension would rise, where it would soften. Only after that did she begin to play, starting far slower than the tempo marked on the page. The first attempts were rough. Her fingers stumbled, and the rhythm fell apart. She stopped often, took a breath, and began again. There was no panic in her movements. She treated the piece like a puzzle, one that could be solved with patience. She practiced each section separately, sometimes only a few seconds of music at a time. Days passed, and the piece slowly began to take shape. She did not master it, but she understood it more deeply with each practice. She felt where it demanded strength and where it needed restraint. Even when her fingers tired, she kept going, driven by quiet focus rather than pressure. At school, no one noticed the change yet. She still played softly in class, still avoided attention. Teachers continued to focus on louder, more confident students. The challenge piece remained a distant expectation, something that would happen later. But inside her, something steady was growing. Not confidence in being seen, but confidence in the music itself. She did not know what the teachers expected. She only knew that she wanted to play the piece honestly, without fear. As the evaluation day drew closer, tension filled the school. Students practiced nervously, comparing progress and complaining about difficulty. She listened quietly, her folder resting on her lap. She did not speak, but her fingers moved slightly, as if feeling the keys in the air. No one suspected that behind her calm silence was a depth they had not yet touched. No one imagined that the quiet student in the corner was preparing to change how they understood her completely. And so, without any announcement or warning, the stage was set for a moment that would surprise everyone involved. The days leading up to the evaluation felt heavier inside the music school. Practice rooms stayed occupied longer than usual, and the hallways echoed with fast runs and repeated mistakes. Students compared notes, worried about tempo and memory slips. Some complained openly, others laughed to hide their nerves. She noticed all of it but stayed apart, sitting quietly with her music folder held close. In class, the teacher reminded everyone that the challenge piece would be played soon. There was a tone of warning in the voice, as if failure was expected from some. A few students exchanged looks. One whispered that the piece was unfair. Another said it was meant to separate the serious ones from the rest. She kept her eyes on the keys, her face calm. When it was her turn to practice in front of the class, she played a simple exercise instead of the difficult piece. The teacher did not stop her. There was an assumption that she was not ready yet. A note was made on the clipboard, quick and final. No one asked how far she had gone with the challenge. At home, her routine stayed the same. She returned from school, finished her work, and sat at the old piano. The window beside it reflected the evening sky, slowly changing colors as she played. She worked through the piece again, still slowly, still carefully. Some parts now felt familiar under her fingers. Others resisted her, forcing her to stop and rethink her approach. She learned to relax her hands where tension tried to take over. She listened closely to the balance between her left and right hand. When something sounded wrong, she did not blame herself. She simply tried again in a different way. The piece was no longer just notes on a page. It had a shape, a direction, and a mood she could feel. At school, the teachers grew more certain in their judgments. They discussed students in short meetings, speaking in practical terms. Some were praised for confidence. Others were labeled inconsistent. When her name came up, the words were familiar. Reliable, quiet, limited. No one said it with cruelty. It was said with certainty. One teacher wondered aloud why she had been given the difficult piece at all. Another replied that it would confirm what they already knew. The challenge would push her to her limit, and that limit would be clear. They believed this was helpful, even kind. Expectations, after all, needed to be realistic. She remained unaware of these conversations. In her world, the only voices that mattered were the sounds she created at the piano. Each evening, she felt closer to the piece, not because it was becoming easier, but because she was understanding it better. She noticed how emotion could change with the slightest shift in touch. She learned when to hold back and when to let the sound rise. There were moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, when her fingers were tired, she wondered if the teachers were right. Maybe she was aiming too high. Maybe the piece truly was beyond her. When that thought appeared, she closed her eyes and played a single phrase she loved, just once. The doubt usually faded. As evaluation day approached, tension sharpened. Students practiced louder, faster, trying to prove readiness. Some made careless mistakes under pressure. Teachers watched closely, taking notes, making mental decisions. She noticed that her hands did not shake. Her breathing stayed steady. She did not feel fearless. She felt focused. The night before the evaluation, she did something different. Instead of practicing until exhaustion, she stopped early. She read through the sheet music one last time, then closed the folder. She sat quietly, listening to the silence in the room. In her mind, she played the piece from start to finish without touching the keys. When she went to sleep, she rested deeply. The next day, the school felt unusually quiet. Chairs were arranged neatly in the practice hall. A piano stood at the front, polished and waiting. Students sat in rows, their expressions tight. Teachers took their places with clipboards and pens. The air felt serious, almost heavy. One by one, students were called forward. Some performed well, others stumbled. A few stopped and restarted. Encouraging words were offered, but judgments were being made silently. When mistakes happened, they were noted. When confidence showed, it was rewarded. Her turn was scheduled later. As she waited, she watched others carefully, not with comparison, but with attention. She noticed how nerves changed the way people played, how rushing caused errors, how fear made hands stiff. She reminded herself to breathe. When her name was finally called, there was a brief pause in the room. Not from excitement, but from mild curiosity. A few teachers glanced up, expecting a short attempt and an early stop. Some students leaned back, assuming this would be quick. She walked to the piano calmly. She adjusted the bench, placed her hands on her lap, and took a moment. That pause caught the attention of one teacher who looked up from the clipboard. It was a small thing, but it stood out. Before beginning, she did not look at the audience. She looked at the keys. Her fingers rested lightly, as if greeting an old friend. She inhaled slowly, then began. The first notes were quiet and controlled. Not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. A few heads lifted. The tempo was slower than expected, but it felt intentional. The sound filled the room gently, without force. As she continued, something subtle changed. The piece began to unfold with clarity. Her hands moved with purpose, each note placed carefully. Mistakes did not appear. The tension that usually haunted this piece was handled with calm control. A teacher shifted in their chair. Another stopped writing. Students leaned forward slightly. No one spoke. She reached a section known for difficulty. Her fingers moved with precision, but more importantly with understanding. The music breathed. It rose and softened naturally. The room felt different now, quieter, more attentive. By the time she reached the final passages, the earlier assumptions had started to crack. This was not a struggle. This was not survival. This was something else entirely. As the last note faded, silence followed. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that comes when people need a moment to process what they have heard. She lowered her hands and stood up gently, unaware of the shift that had just taken place. To her, she had simply played the piece as honestly as she could. For the teachers, however, something had changed. They looked at one another, surprised, thoughtful, uncertain. The challenge they believed would expose her limits had done the opposite. And in that quiet room, it became clear that their understanding of her was no longer enough. Something important had been missed, and now it was impossible to ignore. The silence after her performance did not end right away. It hung in the room longer than anyone expected. A few students shifted in their seats, unsure whether to clap. One teacher cleared their throat, then stopped. The sound of the last note still seemed to float in the air, as if it had not decided where to land. She stood beside the piano, hands folded loosely, waiting. Her face showed no excitement or fear. To her, the moment was already passing. She had played the piece and now it was over. Whatever came next felt out of her control, and she was used to that feeling. Finally, one teacher nodded slowly and said a quiet thank you. Another asked her to sit down. There was no applause, no sudden praise, just a strange calm. She returned to her seat and opened her folder, as if the day would continue like any other. But it did not. When the next student began to play, the room felt different. The sound seemed louder, less balanced. Small mistakes felt more noticeable. A few teachers glanced at one another without speaking. Something had shifted in how they were listening. After the session ended, students were asked to step outside while the teachers stayed behind. In the hallway, conversations started immediately. Some students whispered about what they had just heard. Others tried to explain it away, saying she must have practiced all night or gotten lucky. She leaned against the wall, silent, her eyes on the floor. Inside the room, the teachers spoke in low voices. One admitted they had not expected that level of control. Another said the interpretation was unusually mature. A third pointed out that the tempo choices were thoughtful, not flashy. There was a pause before someone finally said what all of them were thinking. They had misjudged her. That realization was uncomfortable. Teachers are trained to see potential, to guide progress. Missing something this clear raised questions none of them liked. They reviewed their notes from past months and found little that explained what they had just witnessed. She had not demanded attention. She had not competed for praise. She had simply worked. Later that day, she was asked to stay behind after class. The request was polite but serious. She followed quietly, unsure what was expected. Sitting across from the teachers, she listened as they asked simple questions. How often did she practice? How did she approach difficult parts? Did she receive help outside of school? She answered honestly. She practiced every day, sometimes for hours, sometimes less. She worked slowly. She listened carefully. No, she did not have special lessons or outside coaching. Her answers were calm, almost plain. There was no attempt to impress. One teacher asked what the piece meant to her. The question surprised her. She thought for a moment before speaking. She said it felt like a conversation, like something that began with tension and ended with understanding. She said she tried to let it breathe. The room grew quiet again. After that meeting, the teachers began to watch her differently. In the following classes, they noticed how she listened before playing. How she adjusted after even the smallest mistake. How she remained patient when others rushed. These things had always been there. They simply had not been looking for them. Students noticed the change too. She was no longer invisible. Some asked her questions. Others watched her hands during practice. A few kept their distance, unsure how to react. She did not change her behavior. She still arrived early, left quietly, and spoke only when needed. A senior instructor was invited to observe her during a private session. The room was small, the piano slightly out of tune. She was asked to play several pieces, including parts of the challenge again. She did not perform perfectly. A note slipped. A rhythm softened too much. But the understanding behind the music was clear. The instructor asked her to stop midway and try a different approach. She listened, adjusted, and tried again. The change was immediate. It was not obedience. It was comprehension. That difference mattered. After the session, the instructor spoke privately with the school staff. Words like rare and exceptional were used carefully, without excitement. There was no talk of instant success or public recognition. Just the clear understanding that her ability was far beyond what had been assumed. For her, the days continued much the same. She practiced. She attended class. She played. But now there was guidance that matched her depth. Teachers asked her to explore rather than prove. They gave her space to shape sound instead of chasing speed. At home, her family noticed small changes. She seemed lighter, more at ease. Not because of praise, but because she felt understood. When she sat at the piano, there was less struggle, more conversation between her hands and the keys. She was offered opportunities to learn more advanced material, but nothing was rushed. The focus stayed on growth, not display. She was encouraged to listen, to reflect, to rest when needed. For the first time, adults around her spoke about her future with care instead of assumption. Still, she did not see herself as different. She did not think of herself as gifted or special. She thought of herself as someone learning, someone listening. Labels felt distant and unnecessary. The teachers, however, were changing. They questioned their methods, their reliance on confidence as a measure of talent. They began to look more closely at quiet students, at those who worked without drawing attention. Her presence became a reminder of how easily depth can be missed. One afternoon, as class ended, a younger student approached her and said they liked how she played. She smiled politely and thanked them. It was a small moment, but it carried weight. Influence did not always come from speaking loudly. As weeks passed, the story of the evaluation spread quietly through the school. It was not exaggerated. It did not need to be. Those who had been in the room remembered the silence, the shift, the understanding that followed. She continued forward, not as a symbol or a surprise, but as herself. Focused, patient, honest. The impossible piece had not exposed her limits. It had revealed the limits of expectation. And though much of her journey still lay ahead, one truth had become clear. What had been hidden was now seen, and there would be no returning to how things were before. After the evaluation, the school moved forward, but not in the same way as before. The halls sounded familiar, yet something had shifted beneath the routine. Teachers paused more often. They listened longer. When she entered a room, eyes followed her without making it obvious. Not with curiosity this time, but with attention. Her schedule changed slightly. She was given time with instructors who asked fewer questions and made fewer demands. Instead, they listened to how she played and responded to it. They suggested small changes, not corrections. When she tried them, the sound transformed in ways that surprised even her. She was invited to sit in on a rehearsal meant for more advanced students. At first, she stayed near the back, unsure if she belonged there. The music was faster, heavier, filled with sharp turns. She followed along quietly, tapping her fingers against her folder. No one asked her to play. No one asked her to leave. Later, an instructor suggested she try a section. She hesitated, then agreed. She played softly at first, testing the space. The sound fit. It did not fight the room. When she finished, there was no reaction, which felt like the highest kind of approval. Word spread carefully. No announcements were made. No labels were given. But students noticed how teachers treated her differently. Some felt inspired. Others felt uncomfortable. A few struggled with jealousy, though it rarely showed openly. She stayed out of it all, focused on the keys, on the feeling of sound under her fingers. At home, life remained simple. The old piano still waited by the window. She still practiced there, even though she now had access to better instruments at school. The familiar sound grounded her. It reminded her why she began playing in the first place. One evening, she struggled with a new piece. It was not technically impossible, but emotionally unclear. She played it again and again, dissatisfied. Frustration built quietly. She closed the piano and stepped away, something she rarely did. Later, she returned and played it once more, slower, softer. This time, she listened instead of forcing understanding. The piece opened up. She realized that even with recognition growing around her, the work itself did not change. Music still demanded patience. At school, teachers met to discuss her path. They spoke carefully, aware of how easily pressure could damage something delicate. They agreed to guide without pushing, to challenge without overwhelming. This approach felt different from how they handled most talent. They also reflected on themselves. How many others had they overlooked? How often had confidence been mistaken for ability? Her presence became a quiet lesson inside the institution. She was asked if she wanted to perform publicly. The suggestion was gentle, without expectation. She did not answer right away. Performing had never been her goal. After thinking for a few days, she agreed, as long as it stayed small. The performance took place in a modest hall. Chairs filled slowly. The audience was made up of students, teachers, and a few family members. No cameras, no stage lights, just a piano and a quiet room. When she played, she did not aim to impress. She aimed to be honest. The pieces were chosen carefully, including the once impossible one. The room listened. Some people closed their eyes. Others leaned forward. When it ended, applause came naturally. Not loud, but sincere. She bowed briefly and stepped away. Her heart raced, but not with fear. With relief. After that evening, expectations grew outside the school. Invitations appeared. Suggestions followed. Advice came from many directions. The teachers shielded her as best they could, filtering opportunities carefully. She learned to say no. She learned to rest. She learned that progress did not mean speed. Students younger than her began watching her closely, not copying but observing. They noticed her calm, her patience. Some began practicing differently, slower, more thoughtfully. Without meaning to, she influenced them. There were difficult days too. Days when she felt tired of being observed. Days when music felt heavy. On those days, she played simple melodies, ones she learned long ago. They reminded her that joy came before skill. Teachers checked in with her often, not about results, but about balance. They asked how she felt, not how she performed. This was new for her, and she appreciated it more than praise. As months passed, her playing deepened. Not louder, not faster, deeper. She explored silence, space, restraint. She began shaping sound with intention rather than effort. The school continued its rhythm. New students arrived. Old ones moved on. But something lasting had been added. Awareness. She was no longer hidden, but she was also not placed on a pedestal. She existed in a space of respect, which allowed her to grow. One afternoon, she returned to the empty practice room where she had first played the challenge piece. She sat at the piano and played a few notes, smiling softly. Not because of how far she had come, but because she still loved the sound. The journey was not finished. It might never be, but she was moving forward with care, supported by understanding rather than doubt. And for the teachers who once questioned her place, the lesson stayed with them. Talent did not always announce itself. Sometimes it waited, quietly, for someone willing to truly listen. Time moved forward in a steady way, not marked by sudden changes but by small, meaningful steps. She continued to attend the music school, now with a routine shaped by trust rather than doubt. Teachers no longer hovered. They listened. They offered guidance when asked and space when needed. That balance mattered more than any praise. Her days settled into a rhythm. Morning classes, quiet afternoons, evenings at the old piano by the window. The chipped keys still responded to her touch, familiar and forgiving. She liked ending her day there, away from polished rooms and expectations. It reminded her that music had always belonged to her before it belonged to anyone else. Opportunities continued to appear, carefully chosen. Small recitals, workshops, occasional meetings with experienced musicians who spoke more about listening than winning. She took what felt right and left the rest. Saying no became easier with time, and saying yes felt more intentional. There were moments when people asked about her story, how she had learned so quickly, how she stayed so calm. She never had a dramatic answer. She spoke about patience, about slowing down, about learning to hear what the music was asking for. Some understood. Others nodded politely and moved on. At school, the impact of her journey lasted beyond her own progress. Teachers adjusted how they evaluated students. They spent more time watching and less time assuming. Quiet effort gained new value. Mistakes were seen as part of learning, not proof of limitation. Students felt the change too. Practice rooms grew calmer. Fewer rushed performances. More thoughtful ones. Not because everyone became gifted, but because they felt seen. She was invited one last time to play the piece that had changed everything. Not as a test, but as a reflection. She agreed. When she sat at the piano, she did not feel the weight it once carried. The notes felt lighter now, familiar. She played it differently this time. Not to show growth, but to honor it. The music flowed with ease, shaped by months of understanding. When it ended, there was quiet appreciation. No surprise this time, just respect. Afterward, a teacher thanked her not for the performance but for what she had taught them. She listened, slightly uncomfortable, then nodded. Gratitude did not need to be explained. As the school year ended, students prepared to move on. Some left for other programs. Others stayed. She packed her music carefully, aware that change was coming but not afraid of it. On her final day, she returned to the practice room where it all began. The room was empty. Sunlight fell across the keys. She sat and played a simple melody, one she learned long before challenges and expectations. The sound filled the room gently. No one listened, and that was enough. Her journey did not end there. It continued quietly, shaped by curiosity and care. She carried with her the lesson she had lived rather than learned. That true ability does not demand attention. It grows in silence, waiting for someone willing to notice. And for those who did notice, it changed how they listened forever.